Let me give a brief introduction of Professor Milé Terziovski. So Professor Milé Terziovski is close to our organization through mainly the Council of Experts. And we were so happy to have him at one, I think, summit, if I remember correctly, around 2018. He's currently department chair and at the Swinburne University of Technology. He holds this position from January 2018, and he is professor of entrepreneurship and innovation, but also director of the matters of entrepreneurship innovation. So his main professional interests are exactly innovation and entrepreneurship. He's also former dean of the Curtin Graduate School of Business and held a continuing professional chair in innovation for over 4 years period. He is also very active in terms of academic research. He has published, I think, about 53 academic papers published in peer-reviewed journals, some of those A+ ranked. And also he published 4 books, including books published by Imperial College London and so on. Also in these research papers and his books, he also mainly focuses on innovation and entrepreneurship. This is also his teaching area. He also holds numerous awards from Dean Awards, but also for research, postgraduate research award, and so on. Prior to entering the academic area, he was also holding positions which were mainly in the business sphere. So impressive experience, professional, impressive research, impressive professor, and on top of all this, impressive person privately.
Wow.
We are very
you
happy
should have done all that. You've raised the expectations now. How can I get the slides back? Can you put the slides up for me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. По македонски да се обратам, добро вечер на сите, ви благодарам што присуствувате на ова вебинар и ќе се трудам да пренесам некои концепции, методологии што може да ви помогнат во вашиот бизнес или во вашата кариера. Толку ќе речам по македонски, затоа што ми е полесно да зборувам по англиски. Right. Thank you, Nikita, for that introduction. Now, as an academic, I will start with a quiz. Only a short quiz. Are you an entrepreneurial spirit? You just have to answer yes or no. Are you constantly thinking about how to create value and build new businesses, or how to improve or transform your organization? Again, yes or no. And are you trying to find an innovative way of doing business to replace an old, outdated culture? Now, if you've answered yes to any of these questions, welcome to entrepreneurship and innovation. Now, rather than a boring introduction with text, I thought I'll show you this diagram. And I've had this for a number of years when I was teaching at the University of Melbourne. Now, this shows 3 concentric circles, the outer circle being the external environment, the middle circle being the task environment, and then the organization itself. Now, I'm going to be moving from this environment a little bit to this environment, but mostly in here, and looking at the entrepreneurial mindset, how we develop that, and then later on in my presentation, I'm going to be looking at how to develop innovation capability. But if we look at the traditional SWOT analysis, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, it's obvious what's happening at the moment with a significant threat from COVID-19. And the coronavirus will no doubt be remembered as a world reordering event, just like the Great Depression, the global financial crisis. And it is envisaged to accelerate social and economic change that would have taken decades to eventuate. And I'm going to touch on that a bit later on. mainly from sort of the technological driving forces of change. We see the environmental forces of change, which, this could act as a catalyst for the world to take seriously this climate change, which again poses a significant threat. And as innovators and entrepreneurs, we have a significant role to play in that. And I'll touch again when I move into what we should be doing in here in terms of developing an entrepreneurial mindset, but also developing that innovation capability. And of course, the two go hand in hand, innovation and entrepreneurship, and I will articulate what I mean by that. And of course, we've got the economic driving force. The world economy at the moment is obviously hurting badly, and I think we're heading, if we're not already there in Australia, towards a recession, hopefully not a depression. And of course, the social cultural changes that we are seeing. Now, I mentioned I think to Nikita just before we started, there's a term that appeared in the biological literature called punctuated equilibria. In other words, when an event like this takes place, the whole equilibrium system is punctuated by this uncertain driving force that, whether we like it or not, it's there. And we need to innovate and our way out of it. And that's what a lot of countries are doing. Some are doing better than others for different reasons. And I was saying earlier that in Australia, the so-called curve is flattening through this social isolation. But most of the cases that we've seen in this country were brought in by the cruise ships. So as a way of introduction, I've got this corporate performance. So when we look at this in the context of strategic management or formulating strategy, we always start from the external environment. We look at the competitive environment, which is what we call the task, and of course the organization itself, which then leads to these corporate performance measures of financial, customer, process, innovation, corporate social responsibility, environmental and sustainable development orientation. Right, so innovation and entrepreneurship. Now, most researchers and authors, and I'm sure you would have come across Peter Drucker, who sadly passed away about 4 or 5 years ago at a ripe old age of about 93, I think he was. And as early as the mid-80s, this is what he defined. Innovation is the specific function of entrepreneurship. It is the means by which the entrepreneur either creates new wealth-producing resources or endows existing resources. Now, in a crisis, entrepreneurs recognize opportunities. I mean, in the midst of all that's happening around the world at the moment, there are opportunities, and people in some industries are booming. Even toilet paper business is booming. We're seeing medical devices and ventilators and those sort of things that are of huge demand at the moment. So entrepreneurs do recognize opportunities. They act as catalysts for change, and they generate economic growth and job creation. They challenge the unknown. But I think it's important for me to identify this relationship very early, because innovation is the mechanism through which entrepreneurs get their ideas into the market by developing commercializable products and services. And this is the question that is often asked and debated, and I'm not sure whether you want to do that this evening. I'm quite happy to do that. But again, I'll quote Drucker, and this is what he said: most of what you hear about entrepreneurship is all wrong. It's not magic, it's not mysterious, and it has nothing to do with genes. It's a discipline, and like any discipline, it can be learned. And I should also tell you that the origin of the word entrepreneur comes from the French. And it's entreprendre. Excuse me for those of you that speak French, I probably didn't pronounce that correctly, but it's The meaning of it is to undertake. In short, a catalyst for change in the world of business. Now that we've defined some of these terms, let's just have a look at what we mean by an entrepreneurial mindset. And I'm going to give you an example of an alumnus that came out of our business school at Swinburne. And Swinburne is well known for entrepreneurs. Existing customers could disappear. And I used to challenge my students when I was teaching at the University of Melbourne and say, look, if you focus too much on your existing customers, you can go out of business. They say, oh, but Professor, you got that wrong. Well, probably, but if you don't create new customers, then you could go out of business if you oversatisfy your existing customers. There has to be a link between the two. So you satisfy your existing customers, you generate the revenue that's going to fund the new products and services that are in this so-called new stream where innovation and entrepreneurship has a significant role to play. Right. So the problems entrepreneurs are confronted with every day would overwhelm most managers. Again, I'm not saying being a manager is a bad thing and being an entrepreneur is a good thing. They're just different sort of mindset. Managers tend to manage resources, control costs and so forth, which is an important part of that function in the mainstream. But we need to have entrepreneurs, and the word intrapreneur is now emerging in the literature, which means corporate entrepreneurship. So being entrepreneurial in a larger organization rather than just focusing on a startup and growing a business. Now, this is the case study, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I'm going to run out of time. I chose this one because soccer, and you can see my shirt there on the wall, that when I was young, I used to play the game. I was a striker. But this guy, Simon Murphy, is the CEO and founder of RefLive, an app used to digitize the match day administration process for soccer games. RefLive launched at an the FIFA international match in 2016. And the app is now used in over 80 countries by soccer referees, leagues, and associations. And there's just a comment there, what Simon, and we keep in touch with Simon, is on the front page of our brochure that we use in our Master of Entrepreneurship and Innovation. And this is what he had to say. After 5 years of working in a corporate environment, I knew it wasn't for me. I quit my job and enrolled at Swinburne in the Graduate Certificate of Entrepreneurship and Innovation. It helped to validate my desire to start a business and approach the idea process as objectively as possible. Now, Simon basically recognized and seized an opportunity. He converted the opportunity into a marketable idea and added value through time, effort, and skills. And just a little bit more there. I really love the practicality of the course. I was able to apply the coursework learning directly to the ideas that I had. Later on, I talk a little bit about the experiential course that we offer at Swinburne. And it just goes to show that entrepreneurs are not born. Some maybe. It's just that in this particular context, I'm saying that we teach entrepreneurship. We've had some success stories with graduates that have come out of this program. I recently attended it was towards the end of last year. I attended the Global Consortium for Entrepreneurial Centers in Stockholm, in Sweden. And there were entrepreneurial schools there from Harvard and Yale and Stanford and so forth. And it was good to sort of rub shoulders with those people. But it's very interesting how entrepreneurship is part of an ecosystem within their own organizations rather than sort of being seen as part of a center or a school. And that's exactly what we're trying to do at the moment, to create this ecosystem within the university where entrepreneurship is not only in the business school, but in the faculty of engineering and science and so forth. So that leads me to an important term, which I'll take you back to the 40s. And some of you may have heard of Schumpeter. He was an Austrian, not an Australian, an Austrian economist in the 1940s who came up with the term creative destruction. Basically, economies are created and destroyed by entrepreneurship and innovation. And this is what he had to say. Today, countless innovative business models are emerging. And mind you, this is the 40s. Entirely new industries forming as old ones crumble. Upstarts are challenging the old guard, some of whom are struggling to reinvent themselves. I will touch on that in terms of digital innovation and digital transformation. We're seeing a lot of that with a new term that came out of Germany, I believe, called Industry 4.0. And that basically integrates when we talk about the Internet of Things, when we talk about artificial intelligence, we talk about robotics and so on, all being brought together under the one umbrella of Industry 4.0. And that's really taking off in Australia in a big way. At Swinburne, we have what we call the Factory of the Future, where we have partnered with Siemens to develop this Factory of the Future based on Industry 4.0 components, the ones that I just mentioned. The innovation economy, I'm a fan of a book called The Extreme Future, the top trends that will reshape the world in the next 20 years. And mind you, this was in 2007. And this guy is a true visionary. Economies will survive and prosper only if they embrace innovation. They'll come to enjoy shares of the greatest prosperity generator the world has ever seen. And there are lots of signs of the innovation economy. And they're just some figures that I pulled out of some of the literature that I've been reading. Information technology and the communication spending worldwide is about 2 trillion today. By 2025, that rings a bell. Like Macedonia, 2025, yes, it will exceed 5 trillion. Digital transformation, go beyond the process paradigm. You know, when we used to talk about re-engineering in the 90s, now it includes changes to business models as a whole, and it can substantially shape a company and its operation. So, for example, economic productivity is robust where there is a high-tech penetration of computers, wireless, and internet access. There's another book I wanted to mention to you, and it's called The 2020 Workplace by Meister and Williard. And it's not on my slide, and they stated the following. Smart companies should prepare now for wildcards and disasters such as the pandemics, terrorism, and mass climate change that will create an even greater focus on teleworking, which is what we're all doing at the moment. And I've been working from home for the last month. I do get out and do some exercise. And migration to all forms of virtual work. And now the book consists of summary of interviews conducted by the authors with several hundred forward-thinking CEOs as they prepare to lead their businesses through the next decade. A little bit more on the innovation economy. More than 1/3 of the US GDP is already based on innovation industries. But by 2025, more than 2/3 of the US GDP and more than 1/3 of the world GDP will be based on innovation industries. I'm not sure how the current recessions that's worldwide is going to impact on that. But, you know, what we're seeing at the moment, I think most countries are peaking their curves, and hopefully economies will be getting back on track, hopefully by the end of the year, if not early in the new year. Now, information technology drives more than 2/3 of labour productivity today. And by 2025, it's predicted that more than 4 billion people will be online. And I think that process, no doubt, has been accelerated by what we're seeing at the moment. So after setting the context and defining a few terms, how do you imagine your organization's business model might look like, say, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, or 10 years from now? And we can have a very interesting debate. But I came across an article which it's by Emma Benvenu. I'll just put it up like that. I subscribe to a network called markermedium.com, and they've come up with 7 predictions for a post-COVID-19 world. I'm just going to mention those 7 and see how they actually fit into this innovation entrepreneurship mindset. Digital services, so anybody that's in digital services and e-commerce, you'll see their businesses go through the roof. It's already happening. Remote work, it will be a default in the future. Number 3, jobs made remote capable. I think even though we might get back to what used to be normal, if we can say that we will get back to normal, I think you'll find that a lot of jobs will be made remote capable. As education is, we were able to switch to online within a week because we have what we call Swinburne Online, which we've been actually delivering online for a number of years now. So we developed that experience. But a lot of universities were forced to go down that path so they don't lose their students. Telemedicine, medical technology and innovation will play a key role. And as I mentioned, higher education moved to online much faster. There'll be less movement of goods and people, although multilateral cooperation may flourish because international cooperation, I think we realize that we have to work together in this globally in order to come up with a vaccine. And no one can predict how long that's going to take, but it will be people that are innovative, that are smart scientists that come from different parts of the world that will come together. So we have to be ready for the next pandemic. The global monitoring and reporting would be much more efficient, I think, and it'll come back to innovation and people with an entrepreneurial mindset that will make that happen. A little bit more about the next 20 years from Canton, an extreme future. And as you can see there, the global struggle that will follow the rise of China. We can have next 2 or 3 hours that we can talk about that, but we can see what's happening at the moment. There are lots of positives. China's been the factory of the world, but also the origin of this coronavirus, unless you believe in some of the conspiracy theories. The strategies the businesses must implement to compete, the innovations that will transform the global economy, as I've been mentioning, the climate change and energy trends that will reshape the planet. And as people of the world, we need to start believing the scientists about this climate change. I'm sure you've seen how clean Earth has become overnight, more or less, because less people are traveling in cars, less industries are operating, and so forth. And the medical breakthroughs that will extend lifespans. The top 10 imperatives to meet the challenges of the future, and the one that I've just highlighted there, teach innovation and entrepreneurship at all levels of education. And when I say all levels of education, I'm referring to teaching entrepreneurship in primary schools, in high schools, and of course, in universities. And you can see some other things there. Adopt rule of law of intellectual property protection, supporting a free trade, although we'll see if barriers go up now after this global pandemic. So educating leaders for a changing world. And I must commend Macedonia 2025 for meeting the challenge of education of young leaders coming from Macedonia that do a short version of an MBA at some of the leading business schools in the US and Canada. And congratulations on the board and management for continuing that process over, I think, Michael, if you're listening there, it's been almost 10 years. I remember since that particular program started. So why education must change?
Mike, we need you back in MK 2025. Great to hear from you.
Sorry, I didn't call you at the end of March, mate. I've just been snowed under. I did promise you to do that. We'll connect in the next few days if you've got a few moments. So just coming back, why education must change to prepare the future workforce? Well, the current system is not preparing the workforce for the future. And for 8 years, I was managing MBA schools at the University of South Australia and at Curtin University. I was the dean there for 4 years. Now, the MBA, and I'm not trying to bring down, MBAs. It's just the paradigm of the way the MBA has been set up versus what I'm now promoting here in terms of entrepreneurial education. Now, political leaders have lacked the courage to create a future-ready national innovation curriculum. There needs to be more science, more innovation, more high-tech, a more global outlook, and more entrepreneurial skills, as I briefly mentioned earlier. There seems to be an ideological chasm. So the existing pedagogy is more about compliance-oriented management disciplines, finance and accounting and operations management and so on. We need those, no question about that, in the mainstream, which is what pays the bills and the salaries and the wages. But we also need to have a future pedagogy, entrepreneurship courses which value creativity and focus on developing innovation capability. And the question I often ask is, how can this chasm be overcome? And I'm not going to spend too much time on this. This is a hybrid model that we use for teaching entrepreneurship at Swinburne. It's very much an applied with covering theory and concepts and developing frameworks and methods, but very much industry facing. For example, we have an industry called Pitcher Partners. They're an accounting, mid-size accounting firm, and we co-create the units that we teach in the Masters of Entrepreneurship and Innovation. And we're currently developing what we call micro units. So we take a full unit and then we break it up into 3 micro units, and we deliver each micro unit separately. Now, if students do the 3 micro units, they get credit for those because they're accessible. They then have the full unit, credit for the full unit. Now, you might be asking the question, why do you need these micro units? Well, I call them like tapas. You go to a restaurant, instead of ordering the full meal, you order a tapas and you taste that before you order the main meal. Well, with these micro units, the one that we developed for Pitcher Partners is opportunity, creativity, and design. And that's basically looking at those 3 components. Students can have a taste of creativity, and if they like that, they can continue on the next one, and then the final one where they actually get involved in design thinking of a product or a service. We had 90 that registered for these micro units. Prior to these micro units, we couldn't get more than 10 of their students that were enrolling in a full master's program. So full master's programs are important, but I think with new generations coming on and espousing these social, lifestyles, and a lot of them have young families, and we were teaching block mode on Fridays and Saturdays. A lot of them just saying, look, I want to spend time with my family. So these micro units will give us that flexibility to deliver to busy young managers. And it's something, Michael, we can have a chat about and how we do it. It's quite new in Australia. I think, the so-called MOOCs that were emerging about 5 or so years ago, they seem to have gone out of fashion because the MOOCs didn't have much traction because there were hundreds of thousands of people that were enrolling and dropping out of these so-called MOOCs. Whereas these micro units, they have an assessment component and students get credit for completing them. And of course, we then focus on the student experience, the applied learning, the teamwork, and the industry-based experience that I mentioned. So that's the approach that we're taking with entrepreneurship education. Now, just coming back to this pet complaint that I have, which is the conflict in business education. We teach things right. However, do we teach the right things? Think about it. There's a legendary entrepreneurship educator, David Birch, in an article, this is what he said: business schools teach you exactly the opposite of entrepreneurship. Basically, business schools teach you to work for somebody. Okay, that's not a bad thing, but to have that intrapreneurial and entrepreneurial mindset would obviously give people a little bit more flexibility and a safety net if they choose to start their own business. And there's a new term now that's called greypreneurs, would you believe? And I guess I'm starting to fit into that category, although professors, we keep going in our sort of late 60s and 70s. I have a colleague who's 85 and he still teaches in the program. I said, Murray, why are you teaching? He said, if I stop, I'll lose it. So you either use the brain or you lose it. These are some of the units. Have a look at them at your leisure. We start off with a graduate certificate, then a graduate diploma, and then if students would like to continue, they'll do the full master's, which is 12 units. And in the final year, we focus on the applied. So what we call the DNA unit, which is a foundation unit, the opportunity, discovery, creativity, and design, that's the one we've created, the 3 micro units that I mentioned earlier. So change the business school culture. Entrepreneurship is the future of business schools, and that entrepreneurship faculty are beginning to move into leadership roles. Well, I guess I'm one of them, having seen one side, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of the MBA and the mainstream. I think there's a real challenge for people of all ages to develop that entrepreneurial mindset. So the entrepreneurial generation, the entrepreneurial spirit is more alive than ever before. Young entrepreneurs have become known as Generation E, which is one of the most entrepreneurial generations since the Industrial Revolution. We don't have to go very far to see, some of the leading organizations, Facebook and Google and others. Entrepreneurship's got nothing to do with age, really. Entrepreneurs can come from all shapes and sizes and age groups. So the future challenges, the complexity of the challenges facing management is the aging population. Michael, you and I fit into that baby boom generation, and there is going to be a skills shortage. The companies that are best placed to meet the challenges will be the ones that attract and retain the best talent. There is a talent war. I've been trying to hire a full professor in entrepreneurship for the last 2 years. Very difficult. And colleagues often say, well, Milé, of course it's very difficult because they're out there earning money instead of being academics. Fast track the development of the Gen Y leaders, which is what Macedonia 2025 is doing, and doing it very, very well to cope with the baby boomer bubble. Well, sorry to say, but this coronavirus is really hitting the baby boom generation. if you look at the distribution curve of people that have sadly passed away. And finally, their focus on sustaining long-term competitive advantage. Now, I've focused on the entrepreneurial mindset. I've sort of gone backwards and forwards of the macro to the micro, back to the macro. But I did say that I was going to look at this innovation capability, and I'm currently developing a paper based on a research project that we did a couple of years ago, the impact of innovation practice on manufacturing firm performance, which is based on some of this research that I'm going to share with you. So there are new drivers of innovation capability, as mentioned earlier, e-commerce, digital transformation, sustainable development, the acceleration of new product development. I mean, the products you and I are going to be using in the next 5 years have not even been thought of at present. So this latent not knowing what's going to come up in the future is exciting, and it's in some cases it's unsettling. Colleagues of mine, Lawson and Sampson, as early as 2001, defined innovation capability, quote, as the ability to continuously transform knowledge and ideas into new products, processes, and systems for the benefit of the firm and its stakeholders. It's not just the firm, but it's the customers and other stakeholders as well. And that's what I like about this definition when we talk about innovation capability. It's value-based. It's not just satisfying a customer. You know, it's no good going broke and delighting your customers. You just got to look at all the stakeholders that are involved. So the value-based definition of innovation capability is the one that I have been using in my teaching. We conducted research, what we call qualitative research, case studies of best practice to develop innovation capability of a number of organizations in Weisler in Australia, DPEC, which is a shipbuilding organization called Tenex, but we just couldn't use their name at the time. Caterpillar, well known in Australia. Star Pharma in Australia, Eurocopter in France, Sartorius in Germany, and we also looked at an engineering company in Thailand. And after conducting some multiple cross-case analysis of these 8 case studies, this is what we came up with in terms of how to develop innovation capability. The value-based innovation that I talked about, and I'm just using examples of these companies that did it very, very well. Sartorius in Germany, they changed their paradigm from a product-focused company to a total solution provider. You know, there was an example of a company that I used called Mono Pumps. You know, I used to get engineers that went out and sold pumps instead of going out there and saying, okay, can I understand your problem and how can I come up with a total solution for you? And by the way, the pump is going to play a critical role in that solution that I'm going to provide for you. So there's a different mindset there in the approach. They had an integrated strategy. Weisler integrated new product development, sustainable development, and e-commerce as part of their business strategy to influence their innovation capability across the organization. But it was very much part of an articulated strategy, which was then disseminated at different levels of the organization through their business strategy and their functional and operational strategy. This is an important one, and it appears twice in my presentation, also in the next slide, the structure of the organization. And I like what Caterpillar were doing. They moved to what we call a horizontal organizational structure to build innovation through collaboration, and they streamline their processes. And one of the key practices that explains corporate performance is the following: unity of purpose and breaking down barriers between departments and individuals. I mean, that's no surprise. It's not rocket science, but organizations struggle with that. Universities, we struggle with that. We're all in our individual silos and with no windows. Okay, with technology now, we seem to be communicating more by working from home than when we're at work. Although I know, Nick, so you said earlier, we can be more effective, but we still are stuck in our offices communicating via emails in most cases. But, you know, we do go out and have a cup of coffee face to face, of course. And committed leadership. I mean, it goes without saying that to develop innovation capability, it needs to be underpinned by an entrepreneurial mindset and creating the future by learning from the past, but also to engage in education. A few years ago, there was a major study done in Australia. They found that 51% of all managers in Australia lack any formal sort of education on management and business. Now, that's improved over the last decade, but there's still a lot that people rely on experience. I mean, experience is critical, don't get me wrong. Experience can explain how things can be done, but education explains why something works or why something doesn't work. We can explain it through theories and concepts and tools and techniques and methods. And of course, communication, which is the glue that holds this whole thing together in terms of top-down and bottom-up communication processes where collaboration skills, again, are cultivated. Now, the new product development strategy, what has worked in these organizations is cross-functional teams. They've been able to reduce the cycle time from the idea to commercialization by almost a half by setting up a cross-functional team with a person leading it who's respected by the various team members. But team members have to come from a number of different disciplines. So you haven't got all the engineers are together, they select their engineering leader, and they come up with a solution. They all agree with each other. I mean, new product development is about challenging each other, bringing different disciplines together, but having the leader that can bring everyone together and come up with the best solution or the best product that's going to be commercializable in the marketplace. E-commerce and digital transformation, we need to refocus from product orientation that I mentioned to total solution management again. And this corporate social responsibility or sustainable development orientation, not long ago, I think it was almost 2 years ago now, I was invited to give a keynote at Georgetown University in Washington, DC. And I talked about sustainable development orientation and about responsible organizations of the future. They need to ensure continuous environmental fit throughout their product life cycle and think about what's going to happen to their product at the end of its cycle, rather than just, sell it in the marketplace and then let somebody else worry about how to dispose of the product. And again, move from a sequential vertical structure to a horizontal to connect the innovators from the new stream into the mainstream. That connection has to be there with continuous customer interaction, which we must not forget. So I'm running a little bit dry, so excuse me just for a second before I conclude and we can open it up. So what can I conclude from this lecture or presentation? Innovation is the specific function of entrepreneurship, and entrepreneurship is a discipline, and like any discipline, it can be learned. And again, we need to promote that mindset, that entrepreneurial mindset. Now, I have a 9-year-old grandson who's in a primary school here where we live, and they're teaching him coding now. And they're introducing the word entrepreneurship and how to think about, instead of selling lemons, to sell lemonade. Economies are created and destroyed by entrepreneurship and innovation. We're seeing, of course, digital transformation, which includes changes to the business models. Those organizations that are not tech savvy will struggle in the future. By 2025, as we mentioned, more than 4 billion people are envisaged to be online. And of course, the COVID-19 has accelerated that process. And innovation capability is a multifaceted construct which is underpinned by an entrepreneurial mindset. Wow. Now, I've either confused you or I have prompted some of you to ask some questions, and let's engage in a bit of discussion. Nikita, I think we've got some time.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the presentation. And indeed, all these different questions and topics are probably in our minds now. One of the participants to this webinar, Makedonka Dimitrova, already shared few kind of ideas. She's writing some messages in the chat area. So I would actually ask maybe Donna. I have many questions myself, but I would ask Donna, as she was the most active one. So I think you actually know Makedonka Dimitrova. She was teaching entrepreneurship at University American College, and I think you were.
Yes, I do.
Yes, so she's here. She was also director of Entrepreneurship Institute at the university, but then she decided to leave the university, and now she is entrepreneur herself. She established what is called Family Business Institute, and she's very passionate actually about entrepreneurship. So she gave here some examples of Hugo Boss innovation during the Second World War. Then she's asking, how to, because I think we face the same problem that even lower proportion of our managers are actually having some business education. So she was asking something in how to actually make managers engage more in MBA type of courses or these micro units that you mentioned. So Donna, would you like to actually comment, have a question?
Do you hear me?
Yeah.
I hear Makedonka.
Zdravo. So what I had in mind when you were talking about different types of innovation and how we can actually maybe identify those, but also try to implement them later on. Now that I'm more focused towards micros and small enterprises in Macedonia, trying to help them, I see that there is a pattern that most of them follow. And as you mentioned in your presentation, they're more of a managerial type of, let's say, company leaders than actually entrepreneurs. And even though they have started the company as an entrepreneurial company, throughout the process, they lose each other. And whenever we try to stimulate that they attend the course, they hear something new, maybe that will open they will just become open to more knowledge, because there is knowledge out there that they're not aware of. I was wondering if we could maybe do this and boost their interest in these micro units that you've mentioned, because whenever we say there is a training, they say, oh, when is the training? How many hours do I need to spend? I don't have time to do so. How do we do this? Yeah,
no, it's an excellent question. Okay, the way we do it, testimonials from people that have actually come out of a particular program and have been successful. So we use, well, we say not use them, but we ask them politely, and being alumni of our program, of our university, they're more than happy to be involved and give guest lectures and come to information evenings where we explain about the program, and they are there to talk to prospective students. That seems to be one of the most effective ways of convincing people that, hey, if I was to invest money into this program, I've spoken to 2 or 3 colleagues that have done it, and they've become very successful, whether in a large corporate, with an entrepreneurial mindset, or they've started their own business. Now, that seems to be quite an effective way of doing it. The challenge we have found, as I briefly mentioned, that a full master's in Australia can cost $50,000, and in the States it's obviously much more expensive than that. Now, people are not going to commit that sort of money if they're in their early to mid-30s. You know, their families are growing, they're developing their lives and so on. So these micro units seem to be very popular with that age group, in that they can have a taste of it. It's like dipping your toe in the water and saying, oh, it's not as cold as I thought. So micro units is a way of the future. In Australia, we have the Tertiary Education Quality Standards Agency, which is, if you like, the standards body that makes sure that universities offer the quality programs. Because universities in Australia are self-accrediting, but we also have private providers. Now, those private providers are not self-accrediting, and TEXA has to review their programs. And I'm one of those reviewers that I get hired by TEXA to review some programs for the private providers. But anyway, TEXA hasn't got their mind around these so-called micro units. I presented at a TEXA conference last year, and I had 200 people in the room that were interested in this. And there was no objection by TEXA saying, well, why are you doing that? You know, we haven't come up with the guidelines yet. We are developing the guidelines as we're going along. So much so now that in my department, I've got 3 more units that I'm developing. There's going to be one on innovation and entrepreneurship. There'll be one on data analytics, business analytics and data visualization, which is more into this industry 4.0. And then we've got one on financial technologies. Now, these are all going to be micro units. We go into an organization like Siemens and other well-known organizations, we mention micro units and they go for them. So it's a way of getting that interest from the corporates, from the large corporates. And once their middle managers have a taste of it, there's a good chance they may go for something at the next level, which could be a graduate certificate, which is say a 4 unit, and then the graduate diploma, which is 8 units, and then the full master's, whether it's MBA or Master of Entrepreneurship, which is typically 12 units. So that's what we do. In this day and age, when finances are tight, it's very difficult to get people to commit to a large sum of money. We charge typically about 1,500 Australian dollars for a micro unit, which is 1/3 of the full unit. A full unit is 36 contact hours face-to-face. Well, now online, but still we engage in asynchronous, but we do also have synchronous. So what we're doing now is synchronous. But you can't have 36 hours of synchronous because, particularly in this pandemic, self-isolation, some people have got other things to do and they can't be available at a particular point in time to engage in synchronous. I mean, that's what I can say at this stage. Certainly, I'm happy to share some more ideas on these micro units with you.
Can I pose one more short question?
Yes, Donna, please. So I suggest we stay 15 more minutes on the call, if that's acceptable for everyone. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
My question would be, what is your notion if we have a short unit where we would attract dominantly entrepreneurs? Would it be easy to attract more, or it doesn't matter who is attending the course? Because sometimes if it's colleague to colleague, they might be stimulated more. But this is only my opinion. I don't know.
Okay, that's a very good question, because if you have accredited micro units, they still have to meet the entry criteria. If they don't have an undergraduate, what we call a cognate degree, that's in a related undergraduate, then we allow them to come in based on their experience. They might be in a project management role or some middle management role. So we allow them to come into the program. we still look at their highest level of education. May not be an undergraduate degree. It could be a certificate or a diploma. I think what you'll end up doing, you need to look at these micro units from an accredited versus non-accredited. Non-accredited is more about in a consulting sort of fashion, whereas the accredited is more in an educational approach. Does that make sense? So in other words, you can attract corporates, managers that are not interested in getting a qualification, or you can attract a market, those that are interested in getting a qualification like a master's degree, and this is a good starting point for them.
So I would like to make one very brief comment, and I would like to ask everyone, if you would like also to post questions, just write in the chat that some of you, so that we are still muted, but you can write who would like to ask question, and then I will give you a floor. So I just wanted to, you know, I want to look at all this situation or all the times from a more positive perspective. And so this is disruption, COVID-19 crisis or period is disruption. But I must say that it kind of brought more innovation to Macedonian companies, and I'm very happy about that. So they were pushed in a way to innovate. Unfortunately, we don't have still this, like, digital skills are at a low level. It shows, like, in comparison to the EU countries. We don't have this e-market spaces, or a lot of them, only one, I think, active at this stage. But we've seen many small companies and many traditional businesses trying to go online, trying to implement e-commerce. So we are really happy about that. As an organization, we also applied for one project, which is CU-based project, and it was like quick project to help further these traditional businesses to digitalize and to use the digital tools, say, to increase their sales. So just small intervention. Would anyone else like to ask some question? I again don't see you all on the screen. Professor Milé, I would like to ask you to share, if possible, after this webinar, to share the paper which you mentioned, if that's fine, if there are no copyright issues. And also, Macedonca asked for the website which you mentioned. You said I'm subscribed to this website. So
yes, I'll do that.
The and Nick, it would be great to get the presentation as well. The 30 pages, that was very useful. Milé, just a couple of comments. It's so nice to hear you both.
How are you, mate? Good to see you.
Because Boris in Macedonski and when you speak in Australian. So now I'm doing very well, thank you. I'm one of the great entrepreneurs now too. Starting a family business. Two of my sons are working with me. I'm hoping
lovely
to get
family. Thanks for the photo, by the way, the Christmas card.
Thanks, but no, we're starting a family business, and it's very interesting and exciting at this age of my life to actually start a business myself as opposed to working for somebody else. But the question very much on the serious side, I do believe entrepreneurship has become the go-to concept now at most good MBA schools. Obviously, what you're doing in Australia, Europe, all across US now, University of Chicago, Northwestern, Duke, obviously Stanford always was. But I'll be very interested, and I'd like to get your perspectives and what's going to happen if we do have a great recession and possibly even a depression. And it's heartbreaking for me to see all the layoffs that happen already. Quite a few of those in the venture capital world. You add on top of it lack of financing, all of a sudden everything is frozen. And I mean, obviously for the people on this call, but in general, it's going to be so important to stay true to the entrepreneurship, to innovation, and also I would argue leadership development and commitment to employees, because the negative of possible recession or depression, people are going to lose the confidence to take risks. People are going to keep looking for the safe, quote unquote, corporate jobs or working for the government. as opposed to keep driving again the changes. So anyway, again, this is not really a statement or a question. This is more of a concern. I'll try to do my little part, but now again, I'm very interested to hear what are the discussions at your university, and any personal comments or reflections, if you will, to the people listening on this call. Thank you.
Very interesting comment, Michael. And look, you can look at the glass half empty or half full. I think there are signs that we will gradually start coming out of this pandemic, but it's not going to be a sudden, all of a sudden we're back to normal. I think some areas will be relaxed. International travel would be the last that will be relaxed, I think. Certainly cruise ships is also right down the bottom. I mean, we're still struggling with a number of cruise ships that are docked around Australia that have got people on there, and this country doesn't know what to do with them at the moment. But look, I don't think the world's going to go into a depression. I think you'll find that Australia is about, the GDP is down by about 7%, and there are still industries and businesses that are still operating. I mean, our largest organization, BHP, is still employing workers. They just advertise that they need 1,500 more people that they need to hire. Now, the area that's struggled the most, obviously, is the hospitality industry, the tourism industry. I think in the US, there are different reasons. I mean, I don't think the US took it seriously enough, early enough, and you haven't quite peaked the curve, and it's sadly so many people are losing their lives. But I think once that curve is peaked and through social isolation and so on, the economy just can't come to a grinding halt. I think give it 2 or 3 months, I think you'll find that countries will start relaxing, and Europe is starting to look at that. The Dow's been up and down, as you can see. The superannuation that we have in Australia, and it hasn't gone down. In fact, we had one of the most significant rises in the ASX, which is the Australian Stock Exchange, in the last 20 years. There are a lot of entrepreneurs out there that are looking for good bargains now, and they're buying shares in particular industries. So again, Michael, I guess there's no silver bullet in this, but it very much depends on which industry you're in. And if you're fully online, and I can give you an example, my youngest son, who works for a university called Deakin, but he started his own business. And he's a graduate from Swinburne in design. He wanted to leave and get into real estate, and I talked him out of it. I said, keep your current job, but start something online, because what he's been doing at Deakin is working on this cloud technology and developing apps for with instructional designers that he manages and so on. So he set up his own business he designed his own product and developed his own, if you like, supply chain. The product is a suspended heater that he came up with his own design. He gets it manufactured in China, and he has sold close to $1 million in the last year. No physical contact. Everything is digital. Okay, he was affected marginally when China shut down, but they're back in business now, the Chinese, and they started to manufacture. He had a backlog of orders, and he's about to leave his job at Deakin to grow his business. And everything's controlled through his mobile phone. So it goes against the grain of him. He doesn't have a master's degree from Swinburne University in entrepreneurship. He's got a design degree from Swinburne. He designed his product, And I said, John, where did you pick up all the skills? He listens to your audio books, Successful Entrepreneurs, how they've done it. And he's done it. And I just couldn't believe it. How quickly he was able to capture a niche market, and he's been able to compete. There are other products, very similar products out there. But because of his overheads are so low, Mike, he sells his heaters for about $7,000, whereas others, very similar designs, sell for about 12,000 Australian dollars.
Awesome.
And he's getting orders from Europe, from the US, but it's in a particular niche market. Those people that are building new houses, they've got a sort of pretty high disposable income. I said, John, surely your business is suffering as a result of this. He says, no, he said, people are still ordering. So the moral of the story, there are still opportunities. And as we said, in entrepreneurship, an entrepreneur is someone who recognizes an opportunity that other people can't see, and converts that opportunity into a product or service that makes a difference to a customer out there. Look, I think this is a correction factor for the world. I think it's bringing us back to earth. I think we're going to see climate change in a different context. I think it'll equip us to deal with future pandemics. I don't think we learned enough from SARS. There should have been a united effort to develop a vaccine post SARS in 2009. That didn't happen. But I think this time round, there will be a vaccine. It may take 12 months, may take longer. But hardship is something that the world has gone through. I mean, the Spanish flu, World War II, World War I, the financial crisis, and so on and so on. So,
sorry, can we ask also? There are more questions here in the chat area, but can we ask two more? So I will try to connect them. They're not really connected, but trying to save on time. The first one is from Nevenka Dimitrova. I'm not sure whether you know Nevenka. She's also on our board.
I do know Nevenka. Nevenka,
hi.
great to see you.
Hi, Milé. Nice to
you?
see you. Wonderful lecture.
Well, it's been a few years, hasn't it?
Yes.
Thank you.
Intriguing. Thank you.
I can't see you.
Zoom wants me to shut down and restart if I want to.
That's all right.
So I didn't want to interrupt listening and learning. So my question is regarding Industry 4.0. I did quite a bit on it in the last half a year or so when I was working at Philips. And I'm just curious, what do you think? Because all of the concepts for Industry 4.0 now, I think, especially with everybody being digital, working remotely, and the example that you gave with your son, it seems to me it's going to be somehow impacted, maybe accelerated. So I want to hear your opinion. And you mentioned that you already have a program on this. So if you can expand and give us some pointers, that would be great. Thank you.
Right. Our Deputy Vice Chancellor.
Can I interrupt? Apologies on this. Can I also ask Alexandra has also some question, which is a little bit related to this. So Alexandra, can you also pose your question?
Hello, Alexandra. Povedite. Hi.
Hi, everyone. Good morning from the United States. My name is Alexandra. This is my husband, Spasen. So,
Hi, Spasen. Hi, Alexandra. Nice to meet you.
First time on this call. I have been kind of introduced through social media, Instagram, and I was very interested in Macedonia 2025. So I said to my husband, okay, come join me tomorrow morning. They have a webinar. So I want to get more involved and learn what you guys are preaching here. I love all the lecture. Thank you, Professor. So both me and my husband are entrepreneurs. We came from the corporate world, we left corporate America, to kind of get to our next level. We're in their 40s now, like the professor mentioned, you building your experience, your education, and get to a point where you're like, okay, I need to do something else in life now.
Right.
So our question is more now, we're trying to put a group, I mean, we do have around like 45 people, tech company from Macedonia, and we're trying to kind of introduce here in the US market. We're kind of more like struggling what's the need more of the technology, what industry. So my question is, do you think it's most of like ripe of disruption and digital transformation, like in what industry, right?
Yes, what industry is ripe for digital transformation?
Okay. If you asked me this question before the 15th of March, I would have given you a different answer.
Yes.
I think the industries that are emerging now, I mean, you can't go past of what's happening at the moment. And as much as, you know, entrepreneurs that see the opportunity and people say, oh, look at them, you know, they're jumping on the bandwagon. But there are significant needs that rely on entrepreneurs and innovators.
Mm-hmm.
In Australia, we were making 50,000 masks a year. So this manufacturer is now making 1 million masks per week because obviously the need is there, and they sent the army to help to provide labor to produce these masks, because obviously there's a shortage of masks right around the world. So if you're looking at the future, I mean, you can look at pre-pandemic and post-pandemic or during pandemic. I mean, there are 3 stages: pre, current, and post. As I mentioned earlier, I can't see the world being the way it was, let's say, in January this year. I think a lot will change, and I think with digital technologies will be ripe for entrepreneurs in future, particularly in areas such as medical devices, such as healthcare, such as, let's say, technology in the home. With the baby boom generation, we can now call our doctor from home, and the doctor will give you an analysis in real time through FaceTime or through Zoom. But in future, we're going to be spending more and more time in the household before we end up in the hospital. And we're all going to be wired up and probably with RFID chips in our bodies so that they can monitor various temperatures and pressures and blood pressure and so on. So I think that is an area that's going to go through the roof, because everywhere the baby boom generation has been since the Second World War, we've created mass markets.
Yeah, that's great, because that's what we are seeing. In the past, before the pandemic started, we started working with a few doctors on application, but then I even talked to my girls' doctor. We have 3 girls. I said, do you guys use anything on technology? If I'm busy, we have a busy life. If I want to just go on a phone call, the doctor looked at me. He's like, what are you talking about? Like, you know, I know there's a lot of government involved into healthcare, but we did start working with a doctor on application. And now we're seeing like, okay, are we into the right industry? And COVID coming, it kind of like hit us. All the doctors were doing teleconferences. And I said, honey, maybe we're in the right industry. Maybe we're not. I don't know.
Well, one of the more important developments, especially in the U.S., I know the U.S. has been very difficult to go digital in the healthcare industry, was the HIPAA compliance in HIPAA.
Right.
A lot of the restrictions have been loosened up, and a lot of opportunities have opened up with the HIPAA compliance, allowing for medicine to take place. So that's definitely a very interesting industry to take forward, so to speak.
I'm happy to connect at another time, because we want to give a couple others and my contact details, and we can reconnect on Zoom at a time at a later stage. I think you need to look at, you know, what is your core strength? What is your core business at present that you can jump from you know, you don't want to get into an area that you haven't got the core competencies to deal with it. I mean, I gave my son example. He designed the product because he had expertise in that area, but he had a lot of expertise in IT and developing apps and being familiar with cloud technologies and all that sort of stuff. So that expertise is important, but there is a term now which I didn't call, it's called globotics. You know, you can hire someone to develop a website from, let's say, from Macedonia or from Romania or from China at much cheaper cost than what we would pay in Australia or in the US. So globotics is going to disrupt a lot of professions, I think, in the future. But, you know, you can see that in a positive context or in a negative context. Let's reconnect Alexandra and Spase at a later time. My contact details, I think, do you have
the connection? But it's really nice that we have you, Alexandra and Spase.
Thank you. Thank you, Nikita. I'll follow up with you after.
I'm more than happy to reconnect with you guys, and we can find each other on LinkedIn as well.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. Now, coming back to Industry 4.0, Nevenka, what we see Industry 4.0 in a very positive context, because we're a university of technology. So a lot of our core competencies are in technology, in manufacturing, in robotics, in astrophysics and so forth. Of course, I'm part of the business faculty, business and law faculty, and we're trying to develop this ecosystem within the university where entrepreneurship and innovation is the common thread that goes through the various faculties and departments. Now, Industry 4.0 could be another fad. I think you remember the TQM fad of the 80s and 90s. But if you look at the components of TQM, forget about the actual fad TQM, the principles, the concepts, and the techniques are still there. I mean, nothing has changed in terms of the way we approach it. The building blocks of total quality in leadership, customer focus, people, blah, blah, blah. Industry 4.0 could be something like that, that's made up of all these sub-technologies that I mentioned, artificial intelligence, you know, robotics and Internet of Things, but it's how they come together, which the literature calls the bundling, as in bundling the technologies. We haven't seen the peak of bundling of various technologies and how they're going to interconnect. And this is how Cisco grew their business, because they saw themselves as the plumbers of the computer industry by making connections so all the computers can talk to each other. And you know, we're seeing more and more of that. But once through Industry 4.0, everything is connected, including artificial intelligence. The mind boggles. I mean, as we said, we don't know what products we're going to be using in the next 12 months, let alone the next 2, 3, or 4 years from now. So I see it in a positive sense that there hasn't been enough research done, and that's an area that we're looking at the moment. And a lot of corporates like Siemens are looking at Industry 4.0 in terms of developing what's the factory of the future going to look like. I mean, China is producing some top products, but you know, when it comes to quality, I think the West is still leading in that area, particularly in advanced technologies. But mind you, China is not far behind. They are catching up when it comes to patents that have been registered.
Great, thank you. I think for it's Industry 4.0 in some sense, it's for manufacturing, but even more for services, because with digital and AI, you are enabling now globalization of services. And just like you described, you can have somebody in Macedonia develop a website, and also that's an opportunity for Macedonia to offer new services and new companies, because now everything is digital. Yeah, especially in healthcare, and I want to connect to what Alex was saying previously, which is the right industry. I think healthcare and telehealth in particular with COVID-19 is becoming so important.
Absolutely.
But the overall notion of healthcare 4.0 would have been, and there were a few workshops last year and conferences, is to really be able to close that loop and to really help people on one level in the remote distance areas, as well as within a hospital. I mean, hospital administrators don't know what their business is doing in many cases. They have no idea how and when they're going to get paid in many cases, and so on. So running that business, and I know Mike is very much in favor of dashboard, like country dashboard, having a global view of what's going on at every single moment in time. I think that's where healthcare 4.0 and any business that can grow in the future, incorporating concepts of being able to view all the different functions of business and apply some AI so that you have real-time intel into how you're doing versus competition and so on. So
look, you're absolutely right. I'm doing some research with colleagues in with the Australian College for Emergency Medicine. And I have a PhD student who's a medical doctor, and she's doing a PhD on female leaders in emergency departments. Now, by the way, I should say this, I have a Macedonian PhD student. She's also working on lean management in the Australian College for Emergency Medicine. And she's making excellent progress. She works for Victoria Police. And what we're finding is that there seems to be a tension between doctors being, physicians, and then being leaders and managers, if you like, in an emergency department. And that's what Christina's looking at. Do they understand what lean management actually means? Do they understand what agile actually means? And we're finding is that a lot of doctors think that it's part of their profession, so they don't bother educating themselves when it comes to leadership. And that's a big void in hospitals, because usually the people that administer the hospitals are not necessarily the ones that are on the front line. And they're obviously doing a magnificent job worldwide at the moment, risking their lives to protect us. Right. But just coming back to your point, healthcare is definitely going to receive a lot more money from governments right around the world as a result of this COVID-19, because nobody knows, it's not going to go away. COVID-19 is not going to go away. I think we'll have to learn to live with it until such time as the vaccine is developed. But the way we think about various industries, particularly healthcare, and the way the baby boomers, some of the needs that we're going to have to reduce the burden on the healthcare system. My wife and I are thinking, we bought a single story house. We came back from Perth after 4 years there. And we made sure that we were thinking, 10, 20 years from now, and how we're going to cope when we get into, hopefully, in our sort of late 70s and 80s, and, as long as you get the quality of life. But we're going to rely on the healthcare system. And I think that's a huge opportunity for innovators and entrepreneurs. But you're right, Nevenka, Industry 4.0 is just scratching the surface. And the bundling of these technologies and what value that bundling can create remains to be seen, because there just hasn't been enough research done, I don't think.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. So let me say that this was our fourth, actually, webinar. But I would say that we didn't have now most of the most participants at this webinar, but it was certainly most dynamic one and with most questions. So thank you really, Professor Terziovski, for offering this opportunity and this lecture. Yes. And I think that there are a few connections that I see from now. Alexandra with Macedonia 2025, with Professor, but also with Nevenka. I think Nevenka will jump in this communication later.
I'm happy to
and
connect with
Makedonka as well.
Alexandra. Anything in healthcare?
Certainly, yeah. So thank you, everyone. We will, so this is recorded, so it will be posted on YouTube, and we will send you a link if you want to share with others. Then we will also get presentation and also the links and the paper, but this will be all in our follow-up communication. Thank you, everyone, again. And have a great day.
Thank you, Nikita. Thank you, everyone, for attending.